Reheating leftovers seems harmless. It even seems smart. But with 5 specific foods, this habit triggers chemical reactions that overload the pancreas in ways science has already documented. Aldehydes, nitrosamines, bacterial toxins, technical names for a process happening in your kitchen every week. And there is one of these foods that surprises everyone when it shows up on the list. I will get to it. The pancreas is an organ that works in silence. It regulates blood sugar, produces digestive enzymes, and balances metabolism. And when something aggresses it chronically, it does not cry out. It sends no clear signal. It simply yields little by little without warning. That is why pancreatic cancer is so devastating. The 5-year survival rate is less than 12%. That is not an exaggeration. It is documented by the American Cancer Society. And a significant portion of diagnoses come too late precisely because early symptoms are nearly imperceptible. My name is Dr. Thomas Ellsworth. For years, I have closely followed the relationship between everyday dietary habits and diseases that seem to come out of nowhere. And what I'm going to show you here is exactly that, how choices that seem neutral, repeated over time, accumulate a cost that the body collects later. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. What we share here can make a real difference in your health. Have you ever stopped to count how many times you reheated food this week? Once, 3 times, every day? Most people do not think of this as a risk. They think of it as convenience, and most of the time it is not a problem. But with 5 specific foods, the second heating changes the chemical composition of the food in a way the pancreas feels. In the next few minutes, I will show you which 5 foods these are, what happens inside them when you reheat them, and what you can do differently without giving up eating well. And I will save for the end the food that surprises people the most, the one almost everyone considers healthy and that hides a risk few people imagine. We start with the first one. Deep fried foods, French fries, fried chicken, anything that went through a pan with sunflower, corn, or soybean oil. These oils are unstable at high temperatures. On the first heating, significant oxidation already occurs. On the second, that oxidation deepens and generates compounds called aldehydes, specifically 4-HNE and MDA. Studies published on PubMed associate these compounds with DNA damage and chronic inflammation. The pancreas sits close to the small intestine, directly exposed to what comes through the digestive system. When aldehydes arrive regularly, inflammation sets in, and chronic inflammation is fertile ground for serious cellular changes. The second food goes against everything you have learned about healthy eating. Leafy greens, spinach, kale, Swiss chard. Eaten fresh, they are excellent. But stored in the refrigerator, they undergo a silent transformation. The natural nitrates present in these vegetables begin converting into nitrites over time. When you reheat them, those nitrites react with residual proteins and form nitrosamine. The IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, classifies nitrosamines as genotoxic carcinogens, compounds that damage the genetic material of cells. This does not happen the first time you cook the spinach. It happens the second time, after hours or days in the refrigerator. The process is gradual, discreet, and almost no one makes that connection. Do you have the habit of storing cooked vegetables to eat throughout the week? For most vegetables, there's no problem. But for leafy greens, reheating is different from simply eating them cold. That distinction matters more than it seems. The third food is present in almost every home, every day. in large quantities. And the risk is not in eating it. It is in how it is stored and reheated. Rice. The problem with rice is not the heating itself. It is what happens before that. When cooked rice cools at room temperature for more than an hour, spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus begin to multiply. These spores survive cooking. They were there from the start, dormant. And as the rice cools slowly, they find the perfect environment to grow. The additional problem is that the toxins this bacterium produces are heat stable. That means the microwave does not eliminate them. You reheat the rice, kill the active bacteria, but the toxins remain. And those toxins cause intestinal inflammation. The intestine and the pancreas communicate directly through a system researchers call the gut-pancreas axis. When there is chronic inflammation along that pathway, the pancreas responds. The CDC has documented outbreaks associated with Bacillus cereus in improperly stored rice. This is not theory, it is clinical record. The solution is not to stop eating rice, it is to change how you cool it. Spread it in a thin layer, refrigerate it within 1 hour, and consume it within 24 hours. When reheating, make sure it is completely hot, steaming throughout, not just warm, and do not store it again after it has been reheated. The fourth food triggers a reaction that has everything to do with where the heat reaches and where it does not. Roasted chicken. The microwave is convenient, but it heats unevenly. It creates cold spots inside the meat where the temperature is not sufficient to eliminate bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter. Those bacteria survive, multiply during the hours the chicken was stored, and when ingested, trigger a systemic inflammatory response. The immune system reacts, the intestine becomes inflamed, and the pancreas, a direct neighbor of that disruption, absorbs part of that impact. The difference between reheating chicken correctly and incorrectly is not large, but it matters. If using the microwave, cut into smaller pieces, redistribute halfway through and let it rest for 2 minutes after. Heat continues distributing during the rest, or use the oven, covered at 175 degrees Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes, or simply eat it cold. Cold chicken does not carry the same risk. Now we reach the fifth food, the one that surprises people the most, the one most people would never put on a risk list. Baked potatoes, not fried, baked. The ones that seem like the safest choice on the plate. The problem appears on the second heating. Starch-rich potatoes, when exposed to high temperatures, repeatedly produce larger amounts of acrylamide. Acrylamide is classified by the IARC in Group 2A, a probable human carcinogen. The second heating raises that production significantly, but there is a second problem, less well known. When a potato cools after cooking, part of the starch transforms into resistant starch. That resistant starch is beneficial. It feeds healthy gut bacteria, reduces blood sugar spikes, and decreases the load on the pancreas. When you reheat the potato at high temperature, that resistant starch breaks down. The starch returns to its original fast digesting form, spikes blood sugar, and stresses the pancreas in a completely different way. Metabolically, not just chemically, eating the potato cold after it is cooled is nutritionally superior to reheating it. That is documented. And it is one of those pieces of information that changes a simple habit with real consequences. 5 foods, 5 different chemical processes, and one common denominator, the pancreas silently paying the price over time. It is important to understand that none of these foods is an immediate poison. Reheating the spinach once will not cause cancer. The risk is cumulative. It is the repetition week after week, month after month, that builds a chronic inflammatory environment, and it is in that environment that cells begin to behave abnormally. The pancreas specifically is vulnerable to this type of continuous aggression because it has no visible defense mechanisms. It does not hurt, it does not swell noticeably. It simply loses function and accumulates damage. After age 60, that vulnerability increases. The immune system responds less efficiently. The capacity for cellular repair declines, and habits of decades, which seemed neutral, begin to collect a price the body can no longer absorb as easily. But there is a good part in all of this. Each of these 5 risks has a practical solution. None of them requires you to stop eating what you enjoy. It only requires changing how you prepare and store. For fried foods, the principle is simple. Frying oil is single use, and already fried food does not go back into the pan. If you need to reheat, use a dry oven at 180 degrees Celsius or an air fryer. Dry heat does not cause the same oxidation as hot oil again. For leafy greens, the safest rule is to cook only what you will consume right away. If there are leftovers, eat them cold. Do not reheat. The risk of nitrosamines is directly linked to the second heating, not to cold consumption. For rice, protection begins at the cooling stage. Spread in a thin layer, refrigerate within 1 hour, and consume within 24 hours. When reheating, make sure it is completely hot, steaming throughout, and do not store what is left over a second time. For chicken, distribute the heat. Smaller pieces in the microwave, redistributing halfway through with resting time at the end, or a covered oven at the right temperature for enough time. Cold chicken is also a legitimate and safe option. For potatoes, consider eating them cold after they have cooled. The resistant starch that forms during cooling is real and beneficial. If you need to reheat, do so only once and at a moderate temperature. Small adjustments, nothing radical. But the cumulative effect of these adjustments, practiced consistently, is a significantly lower inflammatory load on the pancreas over the years. The science behind what was presented here is not new. Studies on aldehydes in reheated oils, on nitrosamines in leafy greens, on Bacillus cereus in rice, on acrylamide in potatoes, all of it is published and referenced by institutions such as the IARC, the CDC, and the American Cancer Society. The problem is not a lack of information. It is that this information rarely reaches people in a clear, direct, practical way. And that is exactly what makes the difference. It is not what you eat once. It is what you repeat every day without questioning. The invisible habit done on autopilot that shapes your body's internal environment over time. Changing that does not require extraordinary willpower. It only requires knowing what is happening. And now you know. I have a question for you before we finish. Of these 5 foods, which one do you reheat most often? And after everything we covered here, what is the first thing you are going to change? Answer in the comments. I would love to know. If this content made sense to you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to see this, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what is coming next. See you soon.